Here to bring us some more facts on this trade war and the impact it could have on people on both sides of the border, let's bring in Trevor Tombe, a professor of economics at the University of Calgary. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So just before these latest 50% tariffs were applied to Canadian goods, you published an analysis of just how damaging these new levies could be on the Canadian economy. You pegged the number at 90,000 jobs potentially affected. Tell me about that data.
That's right. So a 50% tariff is a very significant rate. And so those firms that are directly affected by the tariff are almost surely going to see fewer sales into the United States as buyers there change behavior, shift into other suppliers, or just forego purchasing those items entirely. And so that'll mean over time, less output by those firms in Canada, potentially less employment directly at those firms. And then the costs on Canada's economy then grow from there because you have suppliers providing inputs and materials and services to those exporters. And then there's suppliers of those suppliers and so on. So over time, those costs mount. And so, yeah, I estimated it would be about 90,000 jobs nationally, although that does presume the tariffs remain in place for some time. And so much of what happens to Canada's economy will depend on how long this lasts.
Canada, of course, is hitting back, as you know, today announcing a multi-billion-dollar package. Many more American goods coming into this country will now be hit with Canadian tariffs. The government calls it dollar for dollar. I think you might quibble with that characterization of what's been announced today. But do you think it was the right move? Certainly many people in this country were clamoring for this sort of response. But as an economist, maybe you have a different take on this sort of maneuver.
Well, I will be the first to concede that this is a really difficult choice for the government, and they're trading off a lot of competing objectives. Any retaliatory package needs to be both well-targeted in the U.S. to actually put pressure in politically important regions and states, and it needs to levy these tariffs on products where we're actually an important market for the United States. And then finally, minimize the economic costs in Canada. And balancing all of these three things is quite difficult. And that's perhaps why the government didn't fully follow through with dollar for dollar retaliation, because some of the items we're tariffing are at 15%, not 50%. And I suspect it's because of that balancing the economic consequences in Canada against the pressures that we see in the US. But my own analysis also suggests that if you look at Michigan, for example, it is pretty significantly exposed to these retaliatory tariffs, equivalent to an economic hit for them of roughly 0.3% of their GDP, which might not sound like a lot, but that's almost as large as what the hit is of the US tariffs on Canada. And so to the extent that this influences political dynamics in an important swing state, I guess time will tell.
Yet it's not just Michigan. Lobster from Maine is also being tariffed, right? And that's a major problem for that state because so much of it is processed actually in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. I think it's nearly half. Plastic products, appliances from Ohio, cheese curds, and cheese products from Wisconsin. I mean, do you think they drew up a good list here? I mean, I know we're just getting a quick cursory glance at it, but is that a list that you think could maybe force the hand of some of the leadership down in the United States, given we might be hearing some squealing, right, frankly, from some of the politicians who are grappling with job loss in their states?
Yeah, it's really difficult to anticipate how the U.S. will respond, especially given who the leadership is in the United States, perhaps a uniquely unpredictable figure. And so we'll have to see. You know, in terms of whether the government got the balance right, you know, this depends on how much weight we put on all the different objectives. I think some of the economic disruption in Canada might be non-trivial from these tariffs because about 3/4 of the items that were targeted are supplies or capital goods to businesses in Canada, rather than consumer goods or food items that don't really have this cascading effect throughout the Canadian economy. And so the costs of our retaliation will mount over time. And so hopefully this is not something that lasts for many months to come.
Do you have an estimate as to what the impact will be on the Canadian economy now that we have imposed these tariffs on American goods? I mean, I know you have that 90,000 jobs figure relating to what the Americans are doing to our goods, but when you look at it from the other vantage point, do you have an estimate, an early estimate as to what could come about as a result of the government's plans today?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We should be thinking about the U.S. tariffs on our exports as a hit that affects output and employment here more than other components of the economy. And our retaliatory tariffs, the biggest effect there is going to be on prices that we pay. And so that certainly affects productivity and may have an effect on GDP growth going forward. But the bigger effect is on the prices that we pay for the items that are facing this tariff that we import from the U.S. And my own preliminary estimates there suggest that overall the hit on consumer prices overall might be as much as a little over 1%. The uncertainty there is how much businesses pass on to consumers when they face these extra costs. And that's going to depend on how long businesses think these tariffs are going to remain in place for, which at this point is really hard to say. But that gives you a sense of scale, about a 1% increase in consumer prices overall. Relative to the 2% rate we'd like to target, that's a pretty big change.
Obviously, in the past, the government has tried to put products on this list that are kind of easily replicatable, I guess is the word I'm looking for, in this country, like things that we already produce. So we can just displace kind of American imports. We might be able to just turn to domestic sources or maybe look to markets elsewhere. Having looked at what the government has put on its list of goods that are now facing these higher U.S. tariffs, do you think that that's possible? Are there Canadian companies that are able to come up with some of these products? Are there other foreign options that are easily accessible?
Well, once you drill down into products that are easily substitutable, the word you're looking for, with other sources, other countries, or domestic suppliers, as well as being politically well targeted in the United States, where Canada is also a major export market for those producers, you're not left with much. If you were to restrict yourself to just swing state items where Canada is a majority of U.S. exports and a minority of our imports, so easy for us to switch into other things, you'd be left with a package that's roughly, I reckon, about 1/10 the size of what the government was looking for. So this is the challenge for small countries. And the Prime Minister alluded to this earlier this week as well. It's difficult to move the needle economically in an economy the size of the U.S. They're a $32 trillion economy. And so if we want to have an economic impact there, then we'll be hitting items that have economic disruption here, things that are hard to substitute away from.
Yeah, is there anything in particular that looks like, ooh, that could be particularly damaging to the Canadian consumer? Just quickly, we're running out of time, but is there anything on that list that you thought, ooh, that could be actually quite painful for consumers in particular? I know a lot of it's industrial products, but is there something on this list today?
Well, food items are covered, and you mentioned some of them, seafood in particular. But food overall, I estimate, might see a cost increase for consumers on the order of over 2%, which again might not sound like a lot, but food is also one of these items that has seen much larger price increases over the past several years and is a rising concern for many households around cost of living, affordability, and tariffs here are going to disproportionately raise the prices of those goods.
All right, let's leave it there. Trevor Tombe, Professor of Economics at the University of Calgary. Thanks for coming on, Trevor. Nice to see you.